Okay, wonderful. Good morning. So let's introduce the first module of that European activity covering different areas. I will later show which areas these are. We are dealing here with ports, terminals, and hinterland links. Let me first give you a brief introduction. Some of you participated already in maritime logistics, but probably not all. So let's briefly go through and just refer to the areas which are significant for what we are going to discuss here. What is very important for such type of lecture is that you really take seriously the requirements for a master course. What's the difference between a bachelor and a master course? Any idea? What do you expect in difference? Just more lectures, longer studies? Is that the only difference? There should be a bigger difference. And the difference also should be mirrored in the lecture. When we lecture bachelors, then we want to prepare them to join companies later on and just do a good job. That's more or less the purpose in a simplified way. When we are going to lecture master courses, the challenge is completely different, because that means to prepare you to participate in management of companies. That's a completely different issue. You are more or less on the other side of what you always see in companies of the two worlds. The one to do and the others to decide. So you are going to prepare yourself to be on the decision side, which is not easy. And it's not just a factual question. For bachelors, it's important that you cover the important facts. That whenever they come, they join the industry, that they have knowledge, they know the terms, and they know some of the processes, most of it. For the masters, it's different. It's impossible to provide all the facts you will later need in your profession. Absolutely impossible. It's not only because it's so wide, it's also because it's so dynamic. When we start a master course, at the end of the master course, some issues changed already. Technology changes, the political condition changes, the operational condition changes, you have a financial crisis, the whole world looks completely different the next day, and you need to be able to adapt to that and also to do a good job. So what does that require in difference from just adding facts one upon the other, knowing more and more? What's the difference? What expect you from the results of this master course when you leave it?
I'm just thinking like...
Mike, please.
So master's course should go much more into depth into the topic, first of all. And second, as you said, okay, bachelor is more like collecting facts, but master should be like already putting them together, you know, putting the pieces of the puzzle all together and actually analyzing and interpreting the information in such a way that you can make better decisions.
Excellent. But what are you going to do if you do not know the facts you would need for decision making? Would you then say, no, I'm not able to make that decision, search for somebody else?
But I mean, whatever decision you take, you never have the whole whole view, the whole facts, right? You never have perfect information. So you need to be able to make the best of what you have, right? I guess this is what we should learn. Yeah.
There is one simple hint I would like to give you. Never stop asking. Never. Even if you might be so lucky to become a CEO, ask. Because nothing is wrong about asking. And the biggest difficulty I always saw on the academic side as well as on the industry side is that people are hesitating to ask, or they are intentionally ignorant because they say, I'm the best anyway. I know everything. All the others are stupid. They're doing this since 10 years, but it's bullshit. It could be done better. First, listen to them. You can learn more in a transport company when you talk to some of the truck drivers than participating in a seminar. Listen and ask, and before you make a decision, before you do changes, understand why they are doing that way. There's a simple thing. If in an industry processes run over a longer period, there is a kind of automatic evolution. You can be sure it is the best solution under these conditions. So if you want to change this, if you want to improve that, the conditions need to be improved. Because they found all the shortcomings over the years and they compensated for it. So they are not doing wrong. Especially in logistics, I noted this very often, that people coming from the university, they are looking and say, why are they so stupid? It could be done better. No, not under those conditions. First, dig deep and look, why are they doing that? So asking questions, that's the most important issue. So we are certainly not able to cover all these areas, but just let me go briefly through a very quick guided tour through maritime logistics. The core business of maritime logistics seems to be restricted to terminals where you load the ships, the sea transport, and the terminal where you discharge or unload. The technical term is discharging, but it's nothing wrong when you use unloading. Everybody believes that that is maritime logistics. Is that really true? Is maritime logistics restricted to the sea transport? What do you think? Any idea? Shashank, you should know. Because he participated in a lecture.
It's not just from port to port, but obviously it's a network. The global network of maritime is actually driving the whole global economy and trade. And there are hubs and there are spokes. So it's not just the ports that the maritime logistics deals with, but around the port, during the peak hours when the trucks drive inside the port, there's a huge deadlock, or there can be big traffic jams around the port area and the highway, so you have to be able to better manage that. And there's obviously hinterland transportation and intermodal transportation, so you have to deal with after what happens after you discharge the containers from the ships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not just about what you just said.
Yep, absolutely correct. In most cases, we use here the example of container shipping because that is the most important segment. But never forget there are also other transport means or other goods. So what do you believe, what will happen with a container arriving in Bremerhaven, maybe from Laem Chabang, the port of Bangkok, that's the Thai is sitting next to me, from Laem Chabang in Bremerhaven, and the destination, the final destination of that container is Siemens in Erlangen, which is close to Munich. What happens with the container when the ship dropped it at the jetty? What do you think? How gets that container to Munich, and who is responsible for that? Who does that? Who organizes that? Yes, that is so important, and it clarifies another fact. Very often, not technical conditions are driving the process. Very often, it's the tariff who drives the process. And we will come back to that a bit later again. And because we have the following tariff structure, when you ship a container from hinterland Shanghai to hinterland Denmark, you pay exactly the same transport fee like directly from Shanghai to Aarhus or to Copenhagen. So it's always continent to continent tariff. That means the shipping line who accepts to ship that container has to organize the hinterland shipping, and it is going to reduce their income. So they are very keen on excellent hinterland transport organization because it's important for their business. Just to provide you an example, it's a rough estimation because transport tariffs can be negotiated. It depends on the amount, on the mass you are going to ship. But a container, a 20-foot standard container from Shanghai to Bremerhaven currently is roughly 2,000 euros. What do you think that transport costs from Bremerhaven to Munich? The same container. Any idea? Pardon?
It will be more than 2,000 euros.
No, it's not more, but it is close to that. Never forget the mic, please. It is close to that. So the sea transport is by far the cheapest transport leg in the whole transport chain. It is the hinterland transport which makes it so expensive, the pre-sea and the post-sea transport. You certainly know what is a 3PL, a third-party logistics provider. What is it?
It's outsourcing.
Please get the mic. I think it's on. It's on, yes.
Okay, so it's one kind of outsourcing that a company used to do it, which they don't have to spend money to provide their own transport routing by, okay, for example, truck, ship, or plane. They use outsourcing to do those things for them, like hire some professional to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. The liner shipping companies are the typical third-party logistics provider. It's a very important issue of third-party logistics provision that the 3PL owns own transport assets. A shipping line owns ships. So that is their core business, but they organize the whole transport chain. In their sea leg, they are a first-party logistics provider. Hinterland transport, they are third-party logistics provider. But what is then a fourth-party logistics provider? Is that the fourth dimension, or any idea?
Isn't that like the additional services provided, like consulting or, I don't know, IT for this? Well, that's fifth.
Yeah. In fact, if you Google it, you will find very different definitions. And it happened the first year when I was here at Jacobs University. I was called by UPS, the Southern German Center it's very close to Munich Airport. And they asked me, and they told me they have a big discussion about fourth-party logistics providers because there's not a clear definition. So I told them my understanding, and they put that later on their website, and I think it is the majority understands it that way. A fourth-party logistics provider is somebody who organizes, who managing the whole transport chain without owning own assets. So in the past, Kühne and Nagel was a classical fourth-party logistics providers because they did a contract with the client and then they looked for the service companies who can do the job. So they contacted the liner shipping, they contacted the truck company and so on. But meanwhile also Kühne and Nagel owns our own truck fleet. So they are no longer a clear fourth-party logistics provider. Another big company which works on that level is Panalpina, for example. But there are not many successful first-party logistic providers. It seems that that business is very, very difficult because many tried it and failed or have been bought by other companies. The French have been pretty successful in that segment quite a time, and then they completely disappeared. They have been bought by other companies. So just that slide which says core business of maritime logistics is terminal, sea terminal, is only partly true. That's the core business, certainly, but it's certainly not the most complicated one, and it is not the most important for a liner shipping company. And the first liner company which started to change to modify their image against the public and against their clients was NYK, the Japanese. They were the first changing from liner shipping to NYK logistics. Now you see on each truck from them or each container, it never appears again NYK shipping, which was the case in the past. You always will find NYK logistics. So they were the first clearly claiming, we are the logistics experts. We provide the whole service. You can call our agent with your case at home, in your lobby, in your house, and we will pick it up and organize everything until it's finally delivered in Orlando or somewhere. So that leads us directly to the pain in the neck of the liner shipping companies. How to get the goods from the ports to the final destination. It's a bit difficult to read that slide because it should be bigger. But I will show you something which might find your interest. Is Yogesh still here? Yes. Because Yogesh was also, no, only Yogesh, was traveling with me to this port here. Can you read it? It's Klaipėda. That's a port in Lithuania. And we are currently working with the container terminal in Klaipėda in Lithuania. And when we walked around the terminal, we looked at the goods they transport, and we looked at the destinations. And they are very successful in reefer cargo. Does everybody know what reefer cargo is? If you do not understand the term, please interrupt. There's nothing wrong about that. I need to explain that. It's so important that you really get it in full. You know what a reefer container is? A container where you can transport cooled goods. That is the classical definition, but it can easily happen that to cool or to freeze the goods changes to heat them. And we had that situation in Lithuania, in Klaipėda, because, for example, bananas being transported in a container need a permanent temperature of 13 degrees. Usually that means in Colombia, when they get them, it needs to cool the container. But when we were in Klaipėda, what was the temperature, Jorge?
It was minus 17 and sometimes...
It was pretty cold there, which means that a reefer container, temperature set on plus 13 degrees, needs to be heated because you need to keep the temperature. So a better definition, it's not the official one, but a better would be temperature controlled, because sometimes you also need to heat. So we looked on the goods, and we were very surprised to find beef, deep frozen beef, from New Zealand, destination Kazakhstan. Look on the map. Let me briefly stop the presentation and look on a Europe map, because it is really amazing. And they told us they do that very often.
So the beef was coming from Zealand and it was supposed to go to
Yes.
Kazakhstan and it was in Lithuania.
Yes, that's what I want to indicate. It's again a bit small, but just to briefly explain it, that's coming from Asia or from Australia, doesn't make a difference, the same trip here. Then you come to the Suez Canal, which is here. Then you go through the whole Mediterranean. You pass around Gibraltar. Then you go up to Skagerrak, pass through the Skagerrak to here, and then you finally end up in Lithuania. And then you transship, means you get the containers from the ship to shore, and you transport them down to Kazakhstan. It's more or less here. Am I right? Good, I'm lucky. That's here. Isn't that funny? If you compare how easily you could go from here to the Black Sea, to, for example, Batumi is one of the transshipment places there, Poti and Batumi. Yeah, there are railway connections from both ports. And then you could go over again here, or going around with a truck, that is also possible, to Kazakhstan. Any idea why they do such a stupid thing?
I guess it's probably cheaper to go around than going through.
Yeah.
It seems like perhaps going through like the Baltic Sea, there might be some type of a regulation or some type of cost that you would have to pay that would make the cost of transport higher than to actually just take the shipping line all the way around and then have a rail or something like this.
Yeah, yeah. In logistics, we have a say. We say always, cargo searches its best way. It's very difficult to influence that. They always find the best way. And that needs, when I say best, it means it needs to meet criteria. Which are the most important criteria for transport?
Yeah, cost and
You
time.
think it's
probably.
the most important? Cost is not the most important. No, no. Every year, there's a questionnaire to the clients asking what is most important for them, and cost usually comes at the third place, not at the first.
Is it reliability?
Yes. Reliability, availability, cost. That is the most important. They accept more expensive terminal contracts when they can be sure they get access to the facilities. Because it's also a misleading idea that speed really counts too much in transport. I personally did an interview with some of the clients. In Germany, it's pretty easy for us. We only need to ask Otto Versand. You know what that is? That's a department store which provides postal services for the goods. Spiegel in the United States. And the biggest in Europe. And they are, because they are the biggest company in Europe, they are one of the biggest clients for the liner shipping companies. Because those department stores, they really order big number of containers. So it's easy to ask them. And it's always, again, the same response. It doesn't matter if a container takes 2 or 3 days more from Asia to us. What matters is we need to know when it arrives. That is very important. Because very often they prepare, for example, Karstadt in Bremen, that's also one of the department stores who work in that way. They prepare special public relation activities when they want to sell some fashion or so. And you're probably not familiar with fashion logistics. It's a very, very challenging logistics. In most cases, the fashion is being ready to sell packed into the container. They just put it out on the hangers. Everything is already there. Not the price, that's a barcode. only by the barcode. You read it and then you get the price and you can easily change the price. But they are already tagged with the barcodes that they can immediately sell it. And they need to know when it's available. It doesn't matter if it's 2 days longer or not. They are not willing, because that was always my question. Would you be willing to pay a certain amount of surcharge, let's say 5 to 10% more, if you get the goods cheaper? No, never. And most people believe that speed really counts. It's not the case. It is important for inventory management, certainly, but it is such an established business that it really doesn't matter. So what might be the reason, we heard already one, in that case here, why they do that? I cannot believe that it's really cheaper. Cost is probably not the dominating factor, because it's about 3,000 kilometers more.
Maybe some political factors. I don't know. There's Turkey there.
Could, and then... Yes. In fact, I don't exactly know. I also only can guess. We asked them in Klaipėda, and they also didn't know. They say, okay, the clients want it that way. A terminal does what the client wants. So they are not asking why the clients are doing that. But it could be there are some political factors, for example, customs. In international transport logistics, customs is one of the biggest problems. It can easily destroy your whole transport chain. When they keep your goods in the port, when they don't release it, when you need to put some bills under the table to get the whole process going. That's very often the case. That's how it works. And please do not misunderstand me. I am not blaming corrupt customs officers. I'm blaming the governments. Because I know, also in Europe, I know governments who intentionally pay the customs officer so low that they can't live on that. And they simply expect, get your money yourself. That's the way how it works. So you can't blame them. It is a result of simply the system. Yeah, that could be a case. Another problem could be reliability. Because I ask, how are the goods shipped to Kazakhstan from Klaipėda? Usually on railway. It seems that the railway connection is pretty reliable. Obviously, it is reliable. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. If you go through the Black Sea, then you're more dependent on the trucks, and you might get problems there. In fact, if you really would follow the best geographical connection, you would go via Iran. That's the best connection to supply Kazakhstan. But there are some problems between the countries, political problems. So that's why it doesn't work. But it might change in the future. There are, meanwhile, new connections from Asia to Europe. Siemens just installed a special train on electronics. Every 14 days, that train goes from China to Munich.
Yes, I just heard that news.
Oh, yeah.
It's from Qingdao.
I didn't really notice that you arrived, meanwhile.
The train was late. I'm very sorry I'm late.
No problem at all. Are you on the picture? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Because we are recording the lecture. And just for your information, whenever you make a comment, so please ask for a mic. Because otherwise, the recorded lecture is difficult to understand. When they only understand my response but do not know about the question, they cannot check if I did it properly or not. So that is very often in logistics and international logistics, that the goods are not going the shortest way. On the other hand, some logistics service providers try to use that argument. I recently came across a marketing leaflet from the port of Constanța. Where is that? Romania, yeah. It's the biggest port in Romania, and they have direct access to the Danube which is one of their advantages. Not direct, there is a lock. But okay, they can access the River Danube, which means they can go up to Prague, to Budapest, to Vienna, which is possible. And they show a map in that glossy brochure, which shows the way around Europe to Northern Europe and the way through Constanza, which is considerably shorter. But it doesn't really work. The reliability, again, is the problem. It doesn't probably work. So whenever they can't rely on the services, they prefer to take a more expensive or a further way. So you need to keep that in mind, that that is a very important factor. Back to the slides. It was mentioned already that infrastructure plays an important role. And infrastructure is a very costly issue. And in hinterland transport, the difficulty is, and that is why we need more scientifically educated logisticians. The problem really is infrastructure measures take an extremely long time, especially in the, let me use that politically completely incorrect term, over democratic countries. Because in Germany, it would easily take 10 to 15 years until you build a stretch of a road. Because there are so many parties involved, so many people think they have to say something about that, that's very difficult. So, transport infrastructure, roads, railway, airports, ports is a very costly issue. So you need to plan properly. So how to know where you later need that? Just before I told you cargo is searching for the best way. So what will happen if you construct a wonderful infrastructure? That's the new infrastructure for the port of Hamburg. They are just adding additional motorway connections. That's why it looks so, yeah, yeah, it looks expensive. It really looks expensive. When I recently passed that bridge, you see, which passes over the railway here, and there was a traffic jam, and I stopped here. And I used that time to count the number of private railway service providers. And I counted 21 different companies in one moment from that single bridge. So there are so many private railway service providers meanwhile. And you always see locomotives because then they have the company logo on. 21 in one moment. And then I called the Port of Hamburg Authority. Pantian will come the next lecture. It comes from Hamburg Port Authority. And they told me that the private railway service provider in the Port of Hamburg, because the railway in the port is part of the port, needs to have an allowance to operate there. And they have 89 companies accredited. 89 private railway operators for the Port of Hamburg. So I was not aware that there are meanwhile so many. It's not long that we privatized railways in Germany. Most countries still do not have a privatized railway. It's a governmental issue. So the problem is to correctly estimate where do we need the infrastructure in future. And I think you can't do that probably without involving the logisticians. Usually, in most countries of the world, the construction engineers are doing that, not logisticians. The whole traffic planning is being done by construction engineers, although in this country here. But I found it very interesting when we discussed the new master course in Buenos Aires, and there were also people participating from Uruguay, from Montevideo. And they very quickly came up with realizing how much logistics influences the development of a country. The economic development, because people get access to markets, consumers get access to markets, to offers, but also the social development. Trade and transport improves the economy. Improved economy means better life conditions. It's such simple. So they pretty soon understood how important logistics really is. They were not aware of that. And I think that is a process which currently goes on. When we first discussed in Germany to put logistics on a university level, many people told us, are you stupid to handle a case? Do you need an academic grade to be able to drive a truck? You cannot be serious. But meanwhile, whole of Europe followed, and the rest of the world is also following. We did the trip to Singapore to discuss that recently. When was that? Yeah, 2 months ago. Yeah, 2 months ago. And they all proudly told us how important logistics, meanwhile, is on the academic level of both the leading universities in Singapore. So I think they understood the message. We are not going to deal with different equipment, but it is just important that you know, in maritime logistics, you deal with extremely expensive equipment. That is a van carrier or straddle carrier. Some of you know that already. But that is the most important or most expensive piece of equipment. It's a gantry crane. Do you have an idea what a gantry crane costs? It depends what size you need. If, as a terminal, you want to be able to handle the biggest ships which are available, that is the new generation of Maersk, the 18,000 TEU vessels, you need to calculate, if you are lucky, $9 million. It's always dollars, not euros. $9 million, one gantry crane. As a terminal, if you want to offer an acceptable service, you need for the big ships at least 5 gantry cranes. That means when you're discussing in maritime logistics and terminal operation to be able to just serve one single big ship, only the crane investment is $45 million. Plus all the transport means you need on the terminal to get the containers, for example, from the gantry cranes to the stacking. That's the storage area. Then you need to stack it in the storage area. So usually they use rubber-tired gantry cranes or stacking cranes, or in small terminals they also use reach stackers. But we are discussing millions, millions, millions of investment. Yes?
I have a question because, okay, in most of the port, it's really required huge capital investments, yeah? As we were just discussing. So I would say most of the ports and terminals, they are state-owned? Or?
No.
No?
No. That's a very good question. Thank you very much for that question, because I almost forgot about that. We have quite different port models. You can classify it in, let's say, 3 main categories. The simplest is what Eugenia just mentioned. The port is owned by the government, and the terminal is owned by the government, and it is operated by the government. That was the classical model of the past, and still many countries have that. The most common model in Europe is something in between. That is the so-called landlord model. I'm pretty sure that Pantheon also will stress that, so I'm going through that very briefly. The landlord model means the government or the community, doesn't make a difference, owns the land. They are providing the infrastructure. They pay for the jetty. They pay for dredging. They pay for everything with what is on ground. Sometimes we have slight differences. We also came across the Klaipėda model was, they told us it's a landlord port, but the government only pays for 30 meters from the quay to the terminal, only the first 30 meters. It's different. And the suprastructure means the cranes, the buildings, all what you need for your operation. It's being paid by the operator, by the terminal operator, who is a private terminal operator. So that's the classical model in Europe. And we see that that model is more and more being used all over the world. So again, to simplify it, the government owns the land, providing the jetties and ground-based infrastructure, and all the rest, what you need for operations, is being provided by those companies who get a contract with the landowner, the landlord. That's why it's called landlord model. For example, to operate a terminal for 30 years. Another question?
No, just a comment. I remember when we had the guest lecture from the guy from Frankfurt Airport.
Yeah.
He told us it was the same thing in Frankfurt Airport. Fraport is the company who operates the airport, but then it's owned the land and everything.
Yeah. I will briefly come back to that, but just the third solution we also have in Europe, that is the totally privatized port. Means the land is owned by a private company, and the terminals are operated and owned by private companies. That model we only see in the UK and Ireland. I don't know of any other application in the rest of Europe. The classical model is the landlord port. Coming back to the landlord port, which the same solution is in many airports, that is currently a real conflict on the European Commission level, because the European Commission tries to ensure what they call fair competition. So everybody, every company should have the best chance depending on the services they provide. So that means they want a public tendering for terminals. And the terminal operators, they are fiercely against it because they say, what will happen after we operate a terminal 30 years? Then the contract needs to, that's the classical duration of 30 years. The new contract is going to be tendered, and then another terminal makes a better offer. What's about our investment? The Commission told them, yes, you can sell it to them. Yeah, but how will that work? Because they know exactly that we are depending on selling, so we will not get a good price for our equipment. And if we know that after 25 years, the last 5 years, we will not invest any penny at all. So that's not a good model. So that is currently a real conflict. The Commission wants transparency, and the terminal operators want that the investment is ensured. So we do not know how to solve that. It's not yet solved. We have different vessels. The most important vessel for Northern Europe, for Scandinavia and the Baltic, is not a container vessel, surprisingly. It's the Ro-Ro vessel. Are you aware that, you know, the whole world is containerized, but Northern Europe, Scandinavia, not so much. They work much more with trailers. Why is that? Any idea? There is a significant difference between the trailer and the container. The problem are the pallets, palleted cargo. We have the so-called standardized Euro pallet. And a trailer allows to put 2 pallets next to each other, a container not. So you always have difficulties to store that. So in internal, in regional transport, in Northern Europe, they still prefer the trailers. There are many disadvantages compared to a container. For example, you cannot stack it, but they still prefer it. And the further north you come in Europe, the less a container you will see, and the more trailers you will see. Just to briefly explain that, that is not a truck. The trailer is unattended on that Ro-Ro vessel. That means a vessel which can handle every cargo which can be rowed. That's not restricted to trucks. You can use harvesters, caterpillars, all kind of rolling cargo. I will ask Harry Mons, who does the terminal trip to Bremerhaven with you, that you bypass the area where the Ro-Ro vessels are, then you will see the different cargo, because You see all kind, from individual cars to caterpillars to cranes to everything. Everything which has wheels can be put on a ro-ro vessel. And in that case, they use that, they called it usually muffies, but that's only because that's the manufacturer. The technical term is terminal trucks. So that terminal trucks are just going aboard, picking the trailer up and get it ashore or the other way around. So that is the classical way of feedering the cargo in Northern Europe. You know, you understand the term feeder? To feed a cargo. In fact, it should. If we would grammatically correct say it, it would need to be to feed cargo. But surprisingly, it has developed over the substantive. Somebody who feeds is a feeder. And now the term is feeder. Yeah, it is the hub vessels who get the big amount of cargo to a hub port where it needs to be distributed. And that distribution is called feedering by feeder vessels, and ro-ro vessels are classical feeder vessels. Don't forget about other ships. That's a high challenge for infrastructure. For example, that is a loaded crude oil tanker. Please imagine that the tanker goes underwater about that here. So the draft, that means how deep a vessel of that kind immerses into the water, can easily be 23 meters. So if you want a safety between the ship's hull and the ground, you need a water depth of 25 meters to handle that vessels. And that is why most ports can't do that. And that leads to a very challenging logistics, how to distribute that cargo. That is an upcoming issue of high significance. LNG is the fuel of the future. You understand the abbreviation LNG? It stands for liquefied natural gas. Chemically, it's methane gas. CH4. And for example, just this morning, I read the information about a new small Volkswagen. And that Volkswagen drives with natural gas. They do not say LNG. They say with natural gas. Then you need to know that's not exactly the same. It is compressed gas. And the technical term is CNG, compressed natural gas. What's the difference? When we transport the methane gas as it comes out of the earth, that's why it's called natural gas, because it's directly collected when it gets out from the earth. That's being transported in liquefied condition, not under pressure. Those tanks here are not under pressure. Any idea how deep you need to cool natural gas to be able to transport it that way? It's too cold to put your fingers in. Minus 161 centigrades. Minus 161 centigrades. So those tanks are simply excellently isolated tanks. Isolated for two reasons. The first reason is you want to warm up the gas, because then it would become vapor and disappear. It also happens. That's called the so-called boil-off rate, and that is why those ships very often use the boil-off gas to supply the motor. So they drive on that boil-off rate. But the other reason is, have you an idea what it means for the construction of a ship if steel would be cooled down to minus 161 degrees? What happens? If you cool down steel, it immediately breaks like glass. So that's to protect the ship, and it also to save the cargo, that you do not lose the cargo. So later that liquefied gas needs to be warmed up. Regasification is that process called, before it's being liquefied, liquefaction. Huge plants do that. And then you can use that to fuel your car or equipment or whatever you want. So that is the LNG supply chains is really coming. Project cargo for maritime logistics is the most interesting segment because it's excellently paid. You need specialized knowledge to do it. You need specialized equipment. You need specialized ships. And you see they transport pretty big pairs. If a ship transports such goods, it needs to be very well lashed. You see, you have a huge crew on that ship to lash the cargo that in bad sea state, you're not going to lose it, which happens anyway sometimes. And they use very complicated software to be able to handle the big pieces. So before they try to get it aboard, they apply the software to find out if it's really possible to move it, because the pieces are heavy and high. That is why in the container business, also the container companies are also interested in handling project cargo, and you will see that sometimes. They put it on top of the containers because it's so well paid. And in each container terminal, you will find an area which is called out-of-gauge area, out-of-gauge cargo. There they have the big pieces. Sometimes they also do the packaging. So, and they are really keen on that cargo, and the container crane can easily handle up to 70, 80, new generation, even 100 tons. But those specialized vessels are able to combine two cranes. The maximum lifting capacity of a crane normally is 750 tons. So if they combine both, they can lift up 1,500 tons in one piece. The main problem is not to lift it up. The main problem is to not capsize the ship. That's a challenging process. Sometimes they handle pretty interesting cargo. That was the new generation of container cranes they got in Hamburg. You see how that works? The completely installed cranes are put on a vessel and shipped from Shanghai to Bremerhaven or to Hamburg. Don't forget about that segment of logistics. Aida? That's Aida, yeah. I'm touching it only very, very briefly. But please do not forget about that. Last year we had a discussion with Marseille Technical University. And their idea is because they have a special master course for the cruise business. Marseille is a node of the cruise business. And they asked us if we could combine a master course in that way, that Bremen provides the container logistics, what we believe that we know that excellently, and they provide the cruise vessel operation issue, that we could put that together. We did not proceed with that talks, but it shows that that is an interesting segment. The logistics of those vessels is very, very challenging. Eugenia, did you participate in that project?
No, but I know the company was actually doing the logistics for Aida. They were providing food and whatever it's needed on the vessel.
Yeah. Can you imagine what it means to feed 3,000 passengers on a high quality level every day? And the company who does that was, we did a students project with that company. That company in Hamburg who does that, they do it for Aida. And surprisingly, they provide all the provisions from Hamburg, all over the world. So they always need to pack the containers in a way that the ships have it in time, the appropriate goods and so on. Only the fresh fruits are being bought locally. That would be stupid. But the rest is being shipped centrally. And that's really challenging logistics. Yeah, the container terminals is an issue. So now I'm preparing the next lecture, which will come immediately. That's the ports. And we always have, let me go one step back. What's the difference between a port and a terminal? Shashank? I want to check your memory.
Port is terminal is a part of the port. Port is as a whole.
Yeah. That's correct. A port is a shelter area for ships, just a shelter area for ships. But when it comes to ship operation, means transfer of passengers, transshipment of cargo, you need special facilities. You need a terminal, a passenger terminal or a cargo terminal or even a liquid cargo terminal. So a port is being administered by a port authority. Then you have the terminal operators, and they are both conflicting partners. The port authority is responsible for the public issue, security, safety, everything in order. The terminals want to make money. So they have different interests. The terminal operators are also doing the warehousing. They're doing the pre and post, not doing it, but they need to contribute to pre and post sea transport. Then we have the ships. The ship needs support services, pilots, tugs, crew. Then we have the administrations. That's mainly, there can be many more, but mainly customs, the most important one, immigration, health and other services. So it is a rather complex issue. Then the port plays an important role and the terminals in the whole information chain. And that is an area where academic logistics currently is really required. We have got a situation in logistics that in some cases, I do not know the frequency, do not have real figures, I only know it from some companies, that the message area means the information and communication part of logistics is meanwhile more expensive than physically handling the goods. And I think then something goes wrong. If we have to pay more for the information about the goods to be handled than really handling the goods, then something really goes wrong. And the ICT, the information and communication technology costs are significant for logistics companies. That example is not very important here. That's in fact the PortNet is the Singapore system. They operate that. The European transport policy plays an important role here for us. And they stress very much the environmental issue. So that will play a role. And it's not restricted to the air, but that's currently the main pain in the neck. In Europe, we have a rule about the particle emission. Everybody discusses carbon footprint. Now, the particle emission, there is a limit. And the big European ports are all over that limit. And if they are not able to manage that problem in 1 year from now, they need to pay compensation, and that's very expensive. For Hamburg, that will be millions. That's why we are currently discussing with Hamburg how they can reduce that. But it's also the water. You know, you have seen that yourself very often, that sometimes port water looks like that. So that's what we want. Clear water, fish and chips. Yeah, that I explained that already. It's the first module of that exercise with 7 universities. It's called Ports, Terminals and Hinterland Links. The schedule is this week, next week, 9 full days plus 1 day field trip. Individual assignments, we will explain that a bit later, because you need credits. we have two opportunities. Either we can sell that to you, then you need my bank account, or you need to do something for it. We prefer the second solution. So that would lead, we will provide that, then you can inform yourself about the European transport policy as far as you are interested in that, and that is concluding the today lecture. Thank you very much.